In this video, I'm going to attempt to give another example of the subconscious sorcery that often surrounds celestial events like eclipses. Most of you should be familiar with how this was done via the so-called Great American Eclipse, which had two paths crossing the United States of America, one in 2017 and one in 2024, that formed this sort of X over the country, and how that related to Donald Trump's two presidential terms in the context of what his character was designed to achieve, what they infused into his being in a way that it symbolically moved the water in everyone's body that was perceiving the propaganda, like the moon has the same effect on the tides on Earth. Donald Trump, as the moonchild, is serving that purpose. He's pulling on the collective water, causing a reaction, leading to the kind of thing that can be viewed as a controlled demolition of the United States of America. This is playing out in real time now, so it doesn't sound so crazy anymore, right? Oh yeah, I can kind of see everything that's going on in the actual world supporting this idea now. But similarly, on March 14th, 2025, there is a total lunar eclipse blood moon, which is just a few days from now. Today is Monday, and it is this Friday morning. And obviously, Donald Trump, the moonchild, was born under a total lunar eclipse blood moon. This is how he was infused with this spell that he is able to cast on everyone through what they have scripted into his character, both in terms of the actions attributed to him and the words that are attributed to him. And because it involves Donald Trump, the moonchild, of course it also involves 9/11. And I want to get into how 17 again, in relationship to Matthew Perry's death and now Michelle Trachtenberg's death, is intimately tied in to this Donald Trump personification of 9/11 ritual destruction of the United States. To that end, I wrote a bunch of stuff down so I did not forget it. Matthew Perry dies in his hot tub on 10/28. Before going forward, just a little refresher on that Matthew Perry stuff that I went to it in a bunch of videos last year. So you can check those out if you want more detail. I did a whole video on Matthew Perry's death. And you'll remember from that video that in the days leading up to his alleged death, he had a bunch of Instagram posts with the theme relating to Batman in some way, shape, or form, or the moon. Because obviously Batman is tied into the moon via the bat signal that is designed to mimic what the moon looks like in the sky. There's just a bat symbol over it. Quite literally, in his last Instagram post, you have Matthew Perry sitting in water under the moon, which is evoking this idea of the moonchild, how this death is related to Donald Trump's ritual in terms of what he is designed to do to the United States of America. The moon pulling on the water, moving us in a certain direction. And that will eventually tie into all the Stargate stuff that surrounds 9/11. Quantum leap from one place into another. Moving the water, shifting the tide. So Matthew Perry's death takes place on 10/28, 2023. The 911 call is made at 4:07 p.m., and Perry is pronounced dead at 4:17 p.m. Before going forward, just some notes on 9/11 and the official times that everything took place during. Flight 11 was crashed into floors 93 to 99 of the North Tower at 8:46 a.m. Flight 175 struck floors 77 to 85 of the South Tower 17 minutes later at 9:03 a.m. The North Tower, World Trade Center 1, was the first building to be hit when American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into it at 8:46 a.m., causing it to collapse at 10:28 a.m. after burning for 1 hour and 42 minutes. At 9:03 a.m., the South Tower, World Trade Center 2, was struck by United Airlines Flight 175, and it collapsed at 9:59 a.m. after burning for 56 minutes. This is something that I actually didn't even know about 9/11, that the second tower was the first one to collapse. And the first tower that was struck first by a plane collapsed after the second tower. I actually didn't even know that. But that's kind of neither here nor there in terms of what I want to get into, which is that obviously Matthew Perry dies on 10/28 or 10/28 in terms of time when the second quote-unquote tower fell on September 11th. And I have the second in parentheses there because it was the first one that was hit, but it was technically the second that fell. It seems that his death was a scripted part of the Donald Trump moonchild eclipse ritual, where his second term as USA president is the metaphorical second tower being struck, which later collapses. The 911 call is made at 4:07 or 47, as in Donald Trump's second term as the 47th USA president, which is a metaphorical 9/11 in terms of what they will do to the USA through him. Perry dies at 4:17, which includes the 47 and the 17 minutes between the two plane strikes. Q as the 17th letter, Trump's first term starting in 2017 with the Great American Eclipse, as well as the film 17 again, meaning Donald Q. Trump will be president again and Matthew Perry will be a part of that ritual via his death on 10/28/23. That was a lot, but hopefully you can see how 10/28 is tied into 17 and this film 17 again that Matthew Perry starred in. Before I forget, I want to point out that the runtime of 17 again is 1 hour and 42 minutes. Remember what I just read. World Trade Center 1 burned for 1 hour and 42 minutes. The plane struck that tower, and then 17 minutes later, the second plane struck World Trade Center 2. And then eventually, both towers collapsed in this controlled demolition. But hopefully you see how the entire 9/11 ritual, from the first plane striking to the final collapse of that tower, was 1 hour and 42 minutes. So you have this quote-unquote coincidence that 17 again has a runtime of 1 hour and 42 minutes. In other words, 17 again is this 9/11 ritual. It's a part of it. It's pointing towards it in a different way. It's pointing towards it in the sense that relates to Donald Trump as the personification of 9/11. In the sense that relates to his two presidential terms, symbolically representing these two towers being hit and destroyed in the controlled demolition in New York City on September 11, 2001. Donald Trump is doing that to the country itself symbolically. Which is why it is said he was born under a blood moon total lunar eclipse because his two terms directly correspond with the Great American Eclipse, meaning he is designed to eclipse America. He temporarily crosses it, marks it for destruction, and as he passes out of the United States sun, as it were, something new emerges in the aftermath. A new light, a new order of the ages, right? As Elon Musk said after his election in 2024. The Golden Age, as they have been referring to it as. Perry is Mike O'Donnell in 17 again, or O'Donnell, as in Darko or the Moonchild Eclipse Baby, born during a total lunar eclipse blood moon on June 14th, 1946. Hopefully you can see how that is working subconsciously. O'Donnell is O'Donnell, in the same way that Donnie Darko does it. It's the O as in the eclipse, or the moon that eclipses the sun. Donald is then subconsciously giving your mind the idea of Donald. So you have Donald. That's the character that Matthew Perry plays in 17 again, who would later die in his hot tub under the moon at 1028. There was a total lunar eclipse blood moon on May 4th, 2004, which was 2 days before the series finale of Friends, called The Last One or The One Where They Say Goodbye. Obviously, Matthew Perry played Chandler Bing on Friends. It seems this is why Friends was featured in Leave the World Behind in the context of a quote-unquote cyber attack that destroys the USA. And remember, the cyber attack could be more metaphorical in terms of what Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing through the internet to the United States of America. It's a cyber attack in terms of what they are using technology for and how we will interact with technology in the future, both as that relates to its role in society and our potential eventual merger with it. In that way, it's a cyber attack that isn't as literal as it's portrayed in Leave the World Behind, though it does have the same effect, which is the controlled demolition of the United States of America. The country is destroyed through this process, turned into something new. Anyways, the last scene in Leave the World Behind is a remote control button being pressed to play this episode of Friends, meaning metaphorically, Donald Trump and his second term is being pressed like a pager in the context of 9/11 and the ritual destruction of the USA via a cyber attack. Remember, Donald Trump born under a total lunar eclipse blood moon, which is the same situation that the last episode of Friends was aired under. That episode aired 2 days after a total lunar eclipse blood moon. So the two are associated, meaning in the context of the plot of Leave the World Behind, the character's obsession with seeing the last one and hitting play on that episode is metaphorically Donald Trump and his role in the cyber attack that destroys the United States of America. You see, they're pressing play on that Trojan horse. It's the pager that was laced with explosives. You see? In other words, Trump's second term and the cyber attack on the USA it represents is the last president, or the one where they say goodbye to the USA as we knew it. And that ties in the whole Ingersoll, Lockwood, the last president, Barron Trump stuff, where Trump is associated with the last president. And that doesn't mean he'll be the actual last president of the United States of America. Rather, it's more metaphorical in terms of he is the last of what it used to be. He has forever transformed the office and how it functions, how everyone views it, how society operates in relationship to it. Matthew Perry is Mike O'Donnell in 17 again, or subconsciously O'Donnell. The film is about consciousness time travel, where Perry's character travels through a Stargate, quote unquote, on a bridge directly following a scene where the car radio time is 10:28. This is the car radio that Matthew Perry is looking at right before he gets onto the bridge and jumps into the portal, or Stargate, as it were. 10:28 just so happens to be on this car stereo display, which was the time that the tower collapsed, the time that the 9/11 ritual ended in terms of the controlled demolition of those towers. In other words, 10:28 is associated with the portal or the Stargate that was opened, quote unquote, on 9/11. The quantum leap that will take our consciousness from one place into another, where we make contact with something else. Both in terms of what America was and what it will be, and in terms of our mind. What they were and what they will be when they merge with technology. At his funeral, the song Don't Give Up by Peter Gabriel is played, and the music video for that song is a total eclipse. And there was actually a partial eclipse going on during October 28th, 2023, which again goes back to his resonance intentionally with water and the moon. In terms of the moonchild and 1028, this personification of 9/11 that Donald Trump is. Matthew Perry's daughter in 17 again is Maggie O'Donnell, played by Michelle Trachtenberg. Michelle Trachtenberg died on 2/26/25 in Manhattan, New York City, which was the 32nd anniversary of the original World Trade Center bombing on 2/26/93. The film Falling Down was released that same day in 1993, referring to the bombing of the World Trade Center on that day and how the towers would eventually fall down, quote unquote, in the future. Incidentally, she lived in or near Columbus Circle in a building that was referred to as Two Towers. So she was quite literally found dead in Two Towers in Manhattan, New York City on 2/26/25, the 32nd anniversary of 2/26/93, the original World Trade Center bombing, where Falling Down was released on the same day. Subconsciously putting that idea in your mind that those towers were going to fall down, so that the magic that surrounded the casting of that spell would more readily be accepted by all of the minds that saw those scenes play out on the television. And how that related to everything they said about it. What was happening and who was responsible, the whole thing. Trachtenberg was 39 or 93 as in 2/26/93. She just so happens to be 39 years old on the 32nd anniversary of 2/26/93, and she is found dead at 39 years old, 39 or 93. Remembering also that the second plane that struck the tower did so at 9:03. So you have another 93 relating to the 39 in her death. And this was 17 minutes after the first one hit the first tower, or 17 again. You see, it was 17 again, a second plane striking the second tower, which metaphorically is Donald Trump's second presidential term in relationship to the destruction of the United States of America. Hopefully you can see how this relates to her and Perry's seemingly ritual deaths, somehow subconsciously powering an aspect of the O'Donnell 9/11 ritual. 17, again, 1 hour and 42-minute runtime, is intimately tied into 9/11 in hindsight. 1 hour and 42-minute runtime, the same length of time that 9/11 was, in terms of the planes and the towers collapsing. And then now 2 actors from that film have died under very suspicious circumstances with all kinds of resonance to 9/11. Now, I'm not here to tell you how this was possible or the exact mechanics of it. I'm just explaining what is here, okay? So you can try to figure out what's really going on your own time. I don't want to fall into those debates that they sidetrack everyone through. It's similar to the debate that's been ongoing since 2001 about how they really took those towers down. Again, my position, I don't care. All I can see is the stuff that proves someone knew that they were going to do this, right? That's all I care about. Proving the crime happened with malice aforethought. Of course, I would like to know how it actually transpired, but because the conspiracy theories are planned into the event in advance, you're going to be going through a maze of disinformation that will make it very difficult to ever truly know how exactly they did it, how exactly they brought those towers down. There are endless theories. So instead of focusing on that, I focus on the fact that it happened and people knew about it, and then try to answer the question of why would they do that? Michelle Trachtenberg was born October 11th, 1985, or 17 days before 10/28. And on that date in 1985, Matthew Perry was 17 years old. In Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Trachtenberg is Dawn Summers. It is eventually revealed that Dawn's purpose is to function as the quote-unquote key, designed to open portals to alternate dimensions, where the show's villain uses Dawn's blood to break down dimensional barriers and open a portal or quote-unquote Stargate. "2001: A Space Odyssey," the film by Stanley Kubrick, is directly related to September 11, 2001 through the intentional monolith hotel that was built right outside of Ground Zero. And that film, of course, has the Stargate depicted that Bowman goes through, which results in the creation of the Star Child, which is the moonchild, how Kubrick depicts it, existing outside of Earth. In that context, it's a Stargate, the screen itself, transporting the mind from one place into another. And in the context of that, you have this coincidence that Michelle Trachtenberg dies on 2/26, and she had a character in one of the shows that she was on whose blood was the key to opening a Stargate into another dimension. Do you see the outrageous coincidence that has transpired here? Especially in light of the fact that she was in 17 again, 1 hour and 42 runtime, with Matthew Perry, who also died under very suspicious circumstances. Now, Trachtenberg's circumstances are a little less suspicious because it is alleged that she had recently had a liver transplant. We don't know if that's true, but it is alleged that her health was failing. So this wouldn't have been a shock in the same way that it was alleged for Matthew Perry, right? He had a drug addiction problem. So it was not a surprise that he would OD on ketamine. At least that's what they tell us. Okay, now check this out. In Leave the World Behind, the order of the Buffy DVDs on the shelf in terms of the seasons is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 9, and then 5 plus 6 equals 11, where 2 DVDs from season 5 are in the box backwards, functioning as a quote-unquote slash to make a subconscious 9/11, pointing towards the role of Buffy in the context of the ritual destruction of America via the moonchild Donald Trump through Trachtenberg's death, just like Matthew Perry's friend's death before it. This is the image that Leave the World Behind puts on the screen right before it pans out and shows all the DVDs. So this shot is very intentional. It's above the character's field of vision in a way where she wouldn't even have been able to reach up here. So the director very intentionally started with these Buffy the Vampire Slayer DVDs right in the middle of this scene. So your eyes just go right to it. And you focus on that. And these are box sets in the context of a bunch of other single DVDs. So your eyes naturally gravitate towards the big box sets that you can see, where you have Sarah Michelle Gellar's photo drawing your eyes in. And you have season 2, season 3, season 4. 2 plus 3 plus 4 is 9. And then you have the 2 DVDs backwards in season 5, which is the slash, and then you have 5 plus 6 equals 11. So you have 9, 11, which is subconsciously pointing your mind towards the idea that Buffy the Vampire Slayer, via Michelle Trachtenberg's death, will be related to this Leave the World Behind 9/11 ritual destruction of the United States of America, via the association of Donald Trump and the total lunar eclipse blood moon that Friends is related to as well, via when the last one aired, and how that relates to Donald Trump, the last president, or the one where they say goodbye. This was showing us that Buffy the Vampire Slayer would be involved in this. We just didn't know how at the time. We had no idea that it would be in this way. But obviously someone knew, involved in the creation of this movie. Anyways, on March 14, 2025, the USA will experience a total lunar eclipse blood moon, which obviously is the same kind of moon that Donald Trump was born under, which further is the same blood moon eclipse that the last one Friends episode aired right after in 2004. And check this out, as it relates to Michelle Trachtenberg and 17 again, they have this scene where she is right behind what looks like a blood moon. You see how this is all connected? Her death on 2/26/25 relating to 2/26/93. She dies at 39 years old in the window of this total lunar eclipse of blood moon as it relates to her character's role as the key in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, opening a portal to another dimension, as that relates to the Starchild, Moonchild ritual via Donald Trump and the destruction of the United States of America via a quote-unquote cyber attack, as it's depicted in Leave the World Behind. This movie is from 2009. You have to remember that, where they're showing the foreshadowing of her death at 39 in relationship to a blood moon in the United States of America, and how 17 again is, again, 1 hour and 42 minutes long, or 9/11. These appear to be ritual sacrifices that spill blood, which is the key to powering the Donald Trump ritual destruction of the United States of America. In other words, Michelle Trachtenberg's quote-unquote dawn blood being spilled on 2/26 in Manhattan, New York City, in the lead up to this total lunar eclipse blood moon was symbolically the quote-unquote key to opening the portal to another dimension. In this case, the quote-unquote quantum leap through the quote-unquote Stargate that the Eclipse moonchild Donald Trump is taking the USA through as the personification of 9/11/2001 in the context of the ritual destruction of the USA. As it relates to Trump's second term, the plane has struck the tower, and we are now going to watch it billow smoke until it collapses at quote-unquote 10/28. In effect, taking the USA in all of our minds through the portal and leaping it to somewhere else entirely. Accordingly, 2 co-stars of 17 again die together in this Donald Trump 9/11 eclipse ritual, First Perry at 54 years old, which can be viewed as 45, the first term, the 2017 Great American Eclipse. He dies on 10/28, the time that the last tower collapsed on 9/11, at 4:17, pointing towards 17 and 47, remembering that this took place in 2023, which was the metaphorical 17 minutes between Donald Trump's two terms. And then Trachtenberg on 2/26 in Manhattan, New York City, where 9/11-2001 took place, at 39 or 93, relating back to the first World Trade Center bombing on 2/26/93, and the second plane hitting the second tower at 9:03. Which happens right after Donald Trump's inauguration into his second term, which is the second plane striking the second tower, metaphorically speaking. Blake Lively, who was in Gossip Girl with Trachtenberg, said that she was electricity. You knew when she entered a room because the vibration changed. Electricity, or the lightning bolt, quote unquote, of symbolic energy that changes vibrations in the context of these subconscious rituals that are continuously taking place. And obviously associating her with electricity in terms of 9/11 brings in all of the lightning bolt stuff from Back to the Future and The Wire and traveling through time, creating a parallel reality. All of the familiar themes that exist with Biff Tannen and Donnie Darko and all those familiar sci-fi ideas that relate to this 9/11 ritual and what it is doing to the mind and the United States itself, and how that relates to what the world will look like when this eclipse is over. Michelle Trachtenberg's character on Gossip Girl was Georgina Sparks, again going back to electricity or lightning bolts. And obviously you have the idea of the lightning flash of creation. And how that further relates to the New Year's Day ritual where the Ford F-150 Lightning came across Eagle Pass into New Orleans, where that Super Bowl ritual would take place. And there was a similar blood sacrifice on the streets of New Orleans that sort of powered that ritual, in the same way that these two deaths are doing it. At the very least, subconsciously, just saying that because we don't know exactly what happened to these characters. If they really died or what. We don't know what the reality of it is, so at the very least, we can say it is subconsciously powering these illusions. But it could quite literally be blood spilled to power these illusions. And when you look at the history of ritual magic, it's really not that much of a leap to go to the idea that they are spilling blood as a part of powering these manifestations. Because that's something that these quote-unquote magicians do regularly. It's in black and white for anybody who wants to read about it. Coincidentally, on 3/14/25, the same day as the total lunar eclipse blood moon, Netflix will release The Electric State, featuring the actress who is 11 in Stranger Things, a character who, like Dawn Summers, is responsible for creating a portal into and accessing a different dimension. This is that movie, The Electric State, Millie Bobby Brown and Chris Pratt. The Electric State being released on 3/14, the same day as this eclipse that has all of this association now to Michelle Trachtenberg and the idea of her being electric. And the idea that her character, Dawn Summers, it is said was born on 3/14, right? So you get the idea of her blood being spilled to open the portal to the electric state, as it were. And I go into that a little bit here. Gene Hackman was found dead along with his wife on the same day that Trachtenberg died, February 26, 2025. Symbolically, this implies Gene, Hack, and Man in the context of the larger 9/11 ritual and making contact, quote unquote, with the quote unquote electric state of mind, where consciousness itself is fused into the internet eventually. March 14th, the day of this total lunar eclipse blood moon, is known as National Pi Day because the start of pi is 3.14. In Donnie Darko, which is a film about Donald Trump and 9/11, his mother is reading It by Stephen King while the killing moon is played. So we have this association between It and the killing moon, or the blood moon, symbolically speaking. It sort of resembles the symbol for pi. And this is really interesting when you compare these images. This is from the movie Pi in 1998, and this is from the It remake released in 2017. And it's not exact, but you can see how It, the way it's written here, is kind of similar to the pi symbol. It just doesn't have the curve on the T. But if you put that curve there, it's a very similar structure, I and T put together, with the cross above the top there. And it's interesting how a red balloon features so prominently in this movie because that does kind of look like a blood moon. And in the context of It and the killing moon in Donnie Darko, you have the idea of the total lunar eclipse blood moon being the killing moon, or the moonchild being the killing moon, symbolically speaking, that will kill the United States of America. Symbolically, his second term, which is the second plane striking the second tower, is starting right as a total lunar eclipse blood moon covers the entire United States of America. It's powering that idea of the moonchild through the ritual they have surrounded it with. And when you go to the poster for 17 again, you can see how it's very intentionally in red here, and how the 17 also is pretty similar to pi and It, right? So you have this relationship to 17 again, 9/11, the total lunar eclipse blood moon, It, and pi. And remember, Pi Day, 3/14, the day that this actual total lunar eclipse blood moon is taking place over the United States of America. And then 17 again, which I will say for what feels like at least the fifth or sixth time is 1 hour and 42 minutes long, the same duration as 9/11 itself, has the end scenes where Matthew Perry's character as Zac Efron back in the past is about to go back into the future, showing you the Twin Towers and the 88 and the monolith in this hallway scene. This bridge that is the hallway from the one reality in the past to the future. His consciousness time traveling back to the present, going on a journey, a quantum leap. 88, the Twin Towers and the monolith, the screen, 9/11, making contact, consciousness time travel. The whole thing is there. 17 again. It. Pi. Total lunar eclipse blood moon. Donald Trump born under a total lunar eclipse blood moon. 17 again. The second term. Donald Q. Trump. 17 again. Likewise, this is the poster for chapter 2 of It, and you can see it ends in blood, and you have the two towers, the two pine eyes that are yellow and black, evoking the idea of the moon eclipsing the sun. So you have the Great American Eclipse, the two towers metaphorically being destroyed via Donald Trump's two twin presidencies. The Great American Eclipse. Incidentally, the Life of Pi book was actually released on September 11th, 2001. It Chapter 1 was released September 8th, 2017, a few weeks before the August 21st, 2017 Great American Eclipse, the first path, the same day that a Charlie Sheen 9/11 film was released. I thought I had a picture of that up, but I don't. You'll just have to take my word for it. There is an actual 9/11 film starring Charlie Sheen released on September 8th, 2017, the same day It Chapter 1 was released. Finn Wolfhard plays the character in Stranger Things that is closest to 11. He is in both It films, as well as the recent Ghostbusters films, including Frozen Empire, released on 3/22, 4 days before the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, or metaphorically, the collapse of the USA national anthem, the collapse of America, what it used to be and represent. So you have the bridge in 17 again, where Matthew Perry's character at 1028 goes through the portal, relating back to 9/11 and the Stargate, 1028, the monolith, 2001: A Space Odyssey, the Star Child, and then you have this whole added context of the key that is Dawn Summers via Michelle Trachtenberg and her relationship to 22693 now, dying at 39 on that day in 2025 in Manhattan, New York City. Which is further then associated with the Francis Scott Key Bridge, because she is the key. Her blood is the key in the Buffy series. Michelle Trachtenberg being in 17 again, the movie where Matthew Perry goes into the portal at 1028. It's the key and the bridge. The key, in terms of Michelle Trachtenberg, is the total lunar eclipse blood moon, as that relates to 9/11. And Donald Trump, the moonchild. So, to summarize everything here, Donald Trump was born under a total lunar eclipse blood moon as the quote-unquote moonchild that would eventually eclipse, quote-unquote, the American empire via the 2 presidential terms that coincide with the Great American Eclipse. Metaphorically, the first term was the first tower being struck, and the second term is the second tower being struck, where term 45 equals 9 and term 47 equals 11 when you add up the 2 numbers. So you have the 9/11 more broadly represented via the numbers of these 2 terms. Each term was symbolically cast as a spell via the Great American Eclipse paths in 2017 and then 2024 that make an X over the USA. X equals 88 in American Standard Code 2, which ties Elon's Starlink Musk into the ritual. And remember, a Starlink is a symbolic bridge. Do you see how that's what Elon Musk is doing with Starlink and X? 88 and the bridge, which is the Stargates that 9/11 represents, right? Taking consciousness from one place to another, merging it with the internet, which is exactly what Starlink's end goal is. Putting a chip in everyone's brain and merging it with the internet itself. And creating actual artificial intelligence as a part of that whole endeavor, which the human mind would then further merge with. The first step is the chip in the brain and that whole thing. Well, the first step is the neuroplastic brain becoming digital in a sense, reorienting itself around consuming content through screens constantly to the point where the mind becomes digital in a sense. It's altered in that way. Then, when it's sufficiently altered, the idea of merging it more directly and overtly with the internet becomes more palatable for most people. And then once that is done, you have the full merger into an artificially intelligent, quote-unquote, smart system where you are the internet. Your waking life is that connection. The second term, beginning in 2025, will be symbolically and energetically cemented via Trachtenberg's blood sacrifice on a day both related to 9/11 and leading into the March 14th USA total lunar eclipse blood moon, which Donald Trump is intentionally the embodiment of. Her death and spilled blood further powers the spell that has been cast through him, in this case symbolically relating to the blood of Dawn Summers, opening a portal to another dimension or plane of existence, which will metaphorically take place when Donald Trump is the 47th USA president during this American total lunar eclipse blood moon on March 14th, similar to how they portrayed the quote-unquote Stargate during the Super Bowl 59 halftime show he was in attendance for, which started with the Stargate and finished with Game Over. In other words, this total lunar eclipse blood moon is symbolically the killing moon in relation to Donnie Darko's metaphorical eclipse of the USA. In Buffy, Dawn Summers was born on March 14th, just like Chandler Bing, Matthew Perry's character in Friends, was born on April 8th, the day of the second path of the so-called Great American Eclipse. Noting that 17 again, the film that both of these characters were in, with a 1 hour, 42-minute runtime, I'm going to say that as many times as I possibly can because it's unbelievable, is 1 + 7, 8 again. So 17 again is 88. Which would further explain why this film and these two deaths are so closely associated with Donald Trump, who is the embodiment of 88. The analemmas, the sun and the moon, the moonchild eclipsing the sun, that dance that goes on cosmically in the sky. Which they then infused into Back to the Future via the 88 miles per hour that is required for quote-unquote time travel. Which again is giving the same story about making contact with something else. A quantum leap of the mind from one state into another. Which, through Donald Trump, the moonchild, as it relates to being the personification of 9/11, also applies to the United States itself and what it will become in the future. The ritual destruction of what it used to be. The empire. That was a beacon of certain freedoms, at least as it was presented to us. But that whole thing is over now. At least as that's being presented to us, right? This is all referring to propaganda and what is presented in the media for us to consume. It doesn't necessarily reflect what the actual reality is or could be. This is something that is powering that which is in control of this world's imagination of what it wants to see. So everything supports that vision. And at the same time, infuses itself into our minds so that our imagination creates what it wants to see come into fruition because we have that ability to help it create things. And then finally, on March 14th, the total lunar eclipse of the USA actually begins at 2:26 a.m. Remember, 2/26 is the day that Dawn Summers' blood was spilled, that opens the portal, as it were, into another dimension. Michelle Trachtenberg died on 2/26. Okay, and this total lunar eclipse of the USA begins at 2:26 a.m. 2/26. The blood moon total eclipse begins. 39 years old, 2/26/93. The killing moon, as it relates to the bombing of the World Trade Center, which would later fall down in the September 11, 2001 ritual, which is what Donald Trump is. He is that ritual personified. Hopefully it's really making sense now that we have some actual real world events to point at and say, oh yeah, he's actually doing that. That was not a conspiracy theory. Symbolically, this is what we are witnessing right now. Donald Trump's second term is billowing the smoke. The plane has struck the tower via his election and inauguration. And now we wait for the eventual collapse of the last tower. This is what is taking place right now, as I'm speaking. And along those lines, there's some interesting pictures of Michelle Trachtenberg from her Instagram, where she kind of just shows that she was a connected actor seen here at the infamously secret Disney 33 Club, which an ordinary person can't get into. Dressed up as a bunny rabbit, you know, Alice in Wonderland, following the rabbit down the rabbit hole. And this just gets back to the idea of it's very difficult to know what exactly is transpiring in these events that so clearly have been orchestrated symbolically ahead of the time. How that actually looks in the real world in terms of what they do to these people, I don't know. It could be any variation, sort of along the lines that I went into in the Kubrick video. There are some that are more likely than less likely, and you kind of just have to go through the range of outcomes and settle on one that has the best percentage chance of being true, but you can't prove that because all we have is circumstantial evidence, and no court would say, oh yeah, well based on that, we can definitively say Michelle Trachtenberg died in this way. So it will always be speculation, is my point. If I was an actor in 17 again, I'd be a little nervous about what has transpired with Matthew Perry and now Michelle Trachtenberg. And I bring that up because Zac Efron hasn't had an easy go of it either in the aftermath of this film. There's a bit of trivia on the IMDb page about how Zac Efron had to have an appendicitis operation during filming. And then there is this article from 2022 where Zac Efron says he almost died after shattering his jaw. And there's been all kinds of stuff about how his face looks so different now because he had to have his mouth wired shut as a part of, you know, breaking his jaw. So I'd be a little nervous if I was Zac Efron going forward. The only one who probably doesn't have to be nervous is Leslie Mann, because she's married to Judd Apatow, who of course is in the club. So Leslie Mann is probably safe. But before I forget, also, I have to point out that this film was released on 4/17/09, and 4/17 is the exact time that Matthew Perry was pronounced dead. Not only is the time on the radio 10:28, which is the date that he dies in that hot tub, right before he goes through the portal on the bridge, not only does he die on 10:28, but then the exact time is 4/17 on 10/28, which is when 17 again was released. Also, going back to Finn Wolfhard, who very clearly is going to be symbolically related to all of this going forward. He's only 22, so a long way to go there. There was another movie released just last week titled Mickey 17. In the context of Michelle Trachtenberg's death and 17 again, you have this Mickey 17 film where, in Irish slang, a Mickey Finn, or simply a Mickey, is a drink laced with an incapacitating agent, particularly chloral hydrate, given to someone without their consent with the intent to incapacitate them or knock them out. The killing moon, right? That's what this propaganda is doing. It's a Mickey. It's putting you to sleep, knocking you out. So you have Mickey 17 released 1 week before the electric state and this Pi Day eclipse, 314. Which is related to it and 17 again and the 9/11 ritual surrounding Donald Trump as the total lunar eclipse blood moon moonchild. The 17 is a Mickey. You see, the propaganda surrounding Q17 is a Mickey, symbolically speaking. And it's called a Fin Mickey, as well as all of the It films. It Ends, the Ghostbusters Frozen Empire film. And of course, Stranger Things, which is all about making contact with an upside down, quote unquote, dimension. Which is what Dawn Summers' blood in Buffy the Vampire Slayer does. It opens a dimension into a different reality. It's a Stargate that's created. And Dawn Summers, the character, was born on 3/14. The same day as this total lunar eclipse blood moon. 17 again is Pi, is the total lunar eclipse blood moon. Which relates to Michelle Trachtenberg's death as that relates to the personification of 9/11 2001 ritual via Donald Trump. And just one final note on Matthew Perry, a recent article that came out the day before Michelle Trachtenberg's death, Matthew Perry was given 27 shots of ketamine before death, new documentary claims. Matthew Perry received 27 shots of ketamine in his 3 final days, U.S. Attorney Martin Estrada claims in a new documentary. 5 people have since been charged in connection to his death, including 2 doctors, his live-in personal assistant, and an alleged drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen. On October 28, 2023, Perry received his first shot at about 8:30 a.m. from Iwamasa. The second shot came 4 hours later, and another was injected about 40 minutes after that, according to a plea agreement. "Shoot me up with a big one," Perry reportedly told the assistant before asking him to prepare his hot tub. After running some errands, she returned to the home and found Perry face down in the water. And this is my point. We are never going to know what actually happened here. You look at the symbolic narrative, and it's so obvious this was scripted in advance for him to die at this exact time on this day. But then the story they tell you is very plausible as well. Well, he was a ketamine addict. He was a drug addict in general to opioids. This is perfectly logical that he would have fell off again. And yeah, sure, some people enabled him, but they weren't doing it intentionally. It all just happened. And like I said, you can figure out what's really going on your own time with your own intuition. I'm just focused on the why this is taking place. And the why is all of this and its relationship to the larger symbolic 9/11 ritual as it relates to the pre-planned destruction or controlled demolition of the United States itself. And that is being achieved through Donald Trump, who is the personification of that event. 17 again, 88, one term followed by the again term, the second term. 17 again was 17 minutes in between those 2 terms, metaphorically speaking. Where the movie 17 again, that starred 2 actors who died with a ton of symbolic resonance to this larger ritual, has a runtime of 1 hour and 42 minutes, which is the exact same runtime, as it were, of the 9/11 2001 event itself. From the first plane strike on the first tower to the collapse of the last tower standing. 1 hour and 42 minutes. 17 again. Donald Trump is the 9/11 ritual again, personified into a person that will destroy America instead of those 2 twin towers. That's it. Later.